we have been playing the music for a while. I think I've played how many? Probably close to 5, 6 songs.
Something like that. Yeah, I keep sending them that way. So yeah.
Yes, and they're amazing. That's why we get to have them on the show, and that is 90s Worship Night. We have Chad on the show. Welcome. How are you doing, Chad from 90s Worship Night? How is everything going for you?
Awesome, Mark. Well, first off, it's a privilege to be with you. Thank you so much for the invitation, and thank you so much for supporting us and sharing our music in your wonderful country over there. Yeah, things are going great. We have been touring. We were just in our nation's capital, Washington, D.C., about a week and a half ago. Had an amazing event there, and we're going to head down to Georgia around the Atlanta area this weekend. So we are on the go and, scheduling a bunch of stuff for 2025, hoping that we're going to be in Africa. I don't know about next year, but in 2026 for sure, we're talking about it and making, putting some plans in place. So hopefully, that will happen. But, we're all about, obviously, is the name of the group would imply. We do a lot of 90s era covers with 90s Worship Night. We are going to expand into original songs probably within the next year or so, but we really started off by just wanted to honor legacies and bring some nostalgia of a period of time that was very close to my heart and so many other people that I know, and that's been one of the joys for me is we've got our music out there and have done events, is just connecting with folks who just love that time period, and just the memories that come flooding back when thinking about that period of time, and plus these songs that we're celebrating. So we're very blessed to be doing what we're doing.
I'm sure you've heard this several times. So what specifically was amazing about the 90s? Because that's even the name of, I guess it's a group. So 90s Worship Night. I think that's you and your partner, right?
Yeah, we are a group, so we are an artist, / band. That's also the name of we're going to be putting out a docuseries next year about that period of time and what was going on in church music and church worship culture, if you will, globally, not just in the United States. It was just a lot going on all over the world, because that was really the decade where congregational worship really became a thing. It was kind of right before it turned what I would describe as commercial. So it was a lot different back then because there were just so many different flavors and styles, and there was a lot of artistry, for that time period. But yeah, so we have the docuseries. Like I said, we are an artist / band. We have a record label. We're partnered with Integrity Music on to release those covers, and then we also, host, different events. So my hope is that what we're doing with 90s Worship Night will kind of be an umbrella that we'll be able to kind of, open, some other entities and form some other groups and kind of expand out of there. But it all originates just from that, just the spirit and the excitement and the joy of what the 1990s, had to offer. Specifically with church music. And it really, like I said, what I think the two things that make it stand out are, one, it was the pre-commercial era of church congregational music. And then two, there were just so many different styles. Everything today, the word I like to use is homogenized, meaning that everything kind of sounds the same. I think there's a lot of diversity and, like just ethnically and racially, but even with that, the music all still sounds the same, know. And in the 90s, it didn't. There were different flavors. There was a lot of uniqueness. So I think, just getting to kind of remind people of that being how it was will hopefully have an impact with, what we see moving into the future as far as, styles are concerned.
And to get back to maybe the start, you did grow up in church?
Yeah. I actually, I'm a child of the 90s. I was 15 years old at the beginning of 1996. and that was kind of my entry point. Was that was the year, and that was a really big year in church worship culture. I mean, you had Integrity Music was already doing amazing things, just with Ron Canoli and Don Moen and artists such as that, and definitely having a huge impact, just in countries all over the world with what they were doing. But that was also the year that you had, Hillsong Church in Australia. It kind of hit critical mass and became a worldwide phenomenon that same year. You had this movement called the Brownsville Revival in Pensacola, Florida, here in the United States that was taking off. You had the Vineyard movement in full swing as well, which, that was kind of more of a North American thing, but it had a global influence. And you also had a lot of exciting things happening with worship music in the United Kingdom. So 1996 was a landmark year, and I was kind of, Mark, thrown right in the middle of it, as far as being a young teenager. I played in my youth group. My youth pastor was our lead vocalist in our, little worship band, and we traveled regionally. Not because we were all that great, but just because not many people were doing it back then. So we got a lot of invitations, to travel. And it's so funny because, my youth pastor at that time period, he and I reconnected with 90s Worship Night. So we're doing a lot of these events together, as far as kind of, managing and producing them. So we found ourselves traveling again, just like what we did, almost 30 years ago. So God has a sense of humor. I have definitely found out through this whole project.
Yeah, isn't it interesting? And also, you talked about working on a docuseries that will be out later on that you did specifically going back to that time. So, not to give away anything about the docuseries, but because I've seen the trailer for that, and who specifically are you looking at including in that docuseries, and what are you looking forward to putting out?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the first episode we're hoping will come out the first quarter of 2025. That's the plan. It will be about the Brownsville Revival in Pensacola, Florida, in the U.S., and talking about its profound impact worldwide. So that will be the first episode. The second episode will be Darlene Check and what happened, in Australia, through Hillsong with the worship movement there. That'll be coming out probably sometime, I would imagine, in summer next year. From there, and hopefully a lot of listeners will be excited. The third episode is being planned will be about the origin story of Integrity Music, Hosanna Music, as is well known. But we'll be, that'll kind of feature Don Moen, Paul Baloche, Paul Wilbur, some of the folks who kind of really started Integrity Music. Now we are doing a specific Ron Canoli episode, so that'll probably be fourth or fifth in the sequence. But Ron, he's like, we had to give Ron his own episode, just because he's, just been so impactful. His Lift Him Up album that came out in the early 90s, that's really what that changed the game. It was a game changer. Not only for Integrity Music, but for worship music in general. That was two things, Mark, that's very fascinating with, and your listeners can look it up. The Ron Canoli Lift Him Up was the name of the album. But that was the first worship album that had the artist's image on the cover. So that was completely a game changer. And second, that was the first live worship album that was professionally videotaped and distributed. First time that had ever happened. Now today, like, you can't imagine not getting, having a live worship album videotape. But that was the first one. It was Ron Canoli. So just a lot of history and interesting points to uncover, with that episode. So that's kind of, with the first 5 episodes, that's what viewers, have to look forward to. And obviously, like I said, we'll be covering, Delirious and UK, Sonic Flood, the Passion Movement. We'll be covering all of that along the way as well.
And that's interesting, because when I saw the trailer, because it even when I read about it, they were talking about how I think you're covering most aspects, the executives, or covering the musicians then, and having an all round. But the question I would ask is, what you discovered having to have a conversation with these people back then, and even you experiencing the era the same way. What do you think is missing currently at the moment? And I know we don't have answers for that specifically.
Yeah.
It's not a monolithic solution or something like that, But what do you think? What do you think the direction has been currently that kind of doesn't coincide with maybe what happened back then in the 90s, where there was an explosion of all these amazing musicians?
Yeah, no, that is an excellent question, Mark. And I think that's probably one of the more important questions to ask and to talk about. I think it's really two things. I think it's one, how technology has changed, because back then, I mean, you didn't have, we couldn't just use computers with click tracks and playing, stem tracks, like. We're partnered with Loop Community, for instance. Love Loop Community. Your viewers can check that out if they're in church and want a system where they can play tracks during the worship service. Multi-Tracks is another company where they distribute our stems as well. That technology just wasn't there. I mean, even with the audio visual element, we didn't have now we use ProPresenter, but we didn't even have PowerPoint back then. PowerPoint didn't really become a thing until about 2000. 2001, somewhere in there. So we had overhead projectors, if we had anything, that we would shine the lyrics up on a white wall in the church, and someone would have to manually switch pages to have lyrics up. So I think the lack of technology forced everyone in that era to be a little bit more spontaneous, maybe a little less programmed, which I think left room probably for the ministry of the Holy Spirit a little more than what, is allowed today. I mean, even though, definitely, I think worship as a whole today has a charismatic feel to it, but we're very program driven, right? I mean, everything's down to the minute. And if you're leading worship, you're kind of tied to what the computer's got coming out with the guide track and the click and, the tracks that you're playing. So it's hard to deviate from, okay, this is how we set the song structure up, so we have to stick with it because we're playing it live, with what's coming out of the computer and what's synced with the video and whatnot. So I think that was a big part. And again, I think if we would have had the technology back then, we would have used it, I can promise you, so it's not like we were, that era would have been opposed to it. It's just things change, and I think we've done a good job of utilizing technology to create a greater worship experience as a whole. But that's definitely something that's interesting to kind of think through, and maybe we need to add a little bit more spontaneity with what we're doing nowadays. Even with the lighting, back then they just had the bright house lights on the whole entire time. There was no such thing as the different mood lighting and settings that we use today. So technology would be one aspect. I think the other is just the business structure, and I hate to use that term, but it's very much the case. I mean, because the 90s were kind of the pre-commercial era of congregational worship, there was never any songwriting or anything done with a business agenda. It was just, average people who, were on their local worship teams, and, they felt compelled to write a song to hopefully bless their local church and community. And in a lot of cases, in God's providence, those songs went around the world unexpectedly, changing, millions of lives. I kept hearing that story over and over again with the interviews that we did, for the Docuseries. Whereas today, it's very different. Every big song that you see, there are a few exceptions. I think Waymaker, I say, is probably the most modern example of a song that was written like the 90s songs were, just by one artist, one songwriter, and it just happened to catch on, and God just fanned the flame, and it went around the world. But most of the big songs today, they're from a writing camp where the main publishing companies have a representative, in that room together, and their whole agenda and purpose is to write a song, that can have a huge impact in the church, and not that, there's some amazing songs written today, so it's not that doesn't work, but it's very much different, because like I say, most of the songs that were written in the 90s that became well known in congregational worship, most of them had one writer, at most maybe two. Nowadays it's like anywhere from 4 to 6 songwriters on about any big song that you see, because it's just, again, the methodology is very much different. And I think too, just so many songs back then were written with spontaneity. Whether it be during a rehearsal of a church service or a divine encounter with the Lord that kind of led to a song. Uh, and now it's more of, kind of, oh, I have this great idea for a song, and then the other person in the room is like, oh, well, hey, well, I kind of have an idea. Let's put those ideas together, and then the third person in the room like, okay, this is great. Well, I just thought of this, and it just kind of happens. It's kind of put together in that fashion. So I would say that is a huge difference with this era compared to the 90s.
Yeah, and also even with the music that I play, I receive music from various, whether it's with worship groups or solo acts too, and I like that of late in the last 2 years I've received a lot of new worship groups that have come up together and are making music, and
yeah.
And and that's all over the place. Even whether it's from the UK, I think there's also another worship group that I've had on several times their music on, called Movement Music, and I like that there's more, and they're willing to explore into spaces where, for example, our platform plays all the way from top 40 to R&B, and then but also we play Christian music, and we don't discriminate or put that aside. But I like the fact that people are utilizing that and bringing the music in there. And as years have gone by, I've realized that there's been a change. There's a willingness to explore all these other avenues, to still have your music respected and played in a way that is still respectful to it, but at the same time spreading the word, which is what at the end of the day you want.
Absolutely, and I think a lot of that, just kind of that paradigm shift, if you will, it's because of playlisting, with streaming of music, because now instead of thinking about a radio format, everyone wants to put together their own playlists and put their favorite, flavors of styles in the same playlist. So that's how the consumer wants to consume music now. So I think that is one of the benefits of the streaming era, is that, you could have a gospel or a worship song, right next to a top 40 song in a playlist, and it kind of makes sense, whereas when we were just in terrestrial radio format, that wouldn't have made sense. There were some songs that did cross over. The most famous probably was, Mercy Me, I Can Only Imagine. If you remember, when that happened, that was like in the early 2000s. But very rarely would you see songs cross over to different formats, where now there is no format. It's just whatever people like, that can find itself on a playlist. So I do think that is a good thing overall. And yeah, I think that allows the message to get out to a broader audience for sure.
That brings us to something else. You also do a podcast.
Yes, yeah. I love, these conversations like this, Mark. That's why I was, I love Fresh Connects, love what you're doing. I just have so much admiration and respect for someone like yourself, who's really, trying to, that has a platform, to introduce music to the world, because that's the hardest part, right? Like, you could have a lot of great creators creating, but if it doesn't get introduced, it's not doing anyone any good, So the fact that you are, you have great taste in music, first off, but just second, that you have an openness, to share that, I just have a great admiration for, and that's why I wanted to have a conversation with you. I just wanted to encourage you, man, keep it going. And definitely as we grow, we'll continue to promote, what you're doing as well, along with it. Because one of my favorite sayings is, "A rising tide raises all ships."
Yep.
So we should all we should all want each other to succeed and do well, because that's only going to help everyone else grow and build their platform. But I love the podcast sphere. We're partnered. One of our main partners is a company by the name of Praise Charts, which they make chord charts and sheet music available to the world electronically, of the different worship songs that are coming out, and albums and so forth. Which they do have some of our sheet music too at praisecharts.com. Check that out. But I had talked to them about doing a podcast. Like, man, we want to be a part of this. So we created 90s Worship Podcast, and we finished the first season. It is up on all streaming platforms, including YouTube. We're going to hopefully start a second season, pretty soon with that. But it's just fun, having conversations, and you just never know what's going to come out, what new stories or narratives. And at the end of the day, I hope it's entertaining, but more than anything, just want it to be inspirational and motivational to the listener, just to inspire them to, pursue whatever they feel that, God's calling them to do.
Yeah, interesting. And looking at how you've branched out with the with different avenues that you're taking, an opportunity to explore, whether it's podcasting, whether it's making a docuseries, or whether it's making music and making or going on tour. You've been on tour. You're going back on tour, I think. This week still, right?
Yeah.
So, talk to the importance of having to diversify and explore different platforms to still have your message across.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and that's an interesting question, because I think with us it's a little different. Because I hope that we have great strategy in what we're doing. But we're a little different in that we started this and created the different aspects. I would call it just divinely inspired or Holy Spirit driven. Not to get too churchy, sorry folks, but it was really something we just felt led that the Lord wanted us to do. But I've also found most of the time when the Lord wants you to do something, it also has great strategy involved with it too, and I think it's very, very important to be diversified. You need, like a friend of mine, we were just talking, he's a consultant of mine, and he said, these days there's no silver bullet, meaning that there's no shortcut that you can employ that will just take care of everything for you. You need to have something going on here, something going on over there, something on, going on over there. There's got to be a diversification of channels of getting your message across, and I think with us having a docuseries that's going to be airing, that's going to appeal to a certain group of people. The podcasting will appeal to another group. Programs like this will appeal to a group. All of our music streaming on Spotify and Apple Music, Amazon, all of that will appeal to a group. And then, us doing events, that will appeal to an entirely different group. Now, hopefully there will be some crossover between those. But I always find that, you'll have someone who will be interested in one of those aspects, but not the other, so that's why, to build your fan base and to increase your influence, you have to be doing a lot of different things to get your message out there. And we'll continue to look for those and expand as time progresses.
Yeah. And before we wrap up, I've been stuck at listening to Breathe. I don't know how many times I've played that.
Well, very good. Yeah, the Breathe is a great song. Definitely one of the core, kind of 90s worship songs everyone thinks about. It'd probably be in anyone's top 5 list of that decade for sure. So we had to do a cover of it, for the album, obviously, to kind of do our rendition, if you will. So thank you so much for the kind words on that. And definitely encourage anyone to check out, the album. Definitely the songs that we've had, on your program, but definitely find us 90s Worship Night anywhere you stream music.
Absolutely. And the website is?
Yeah, it's a 90sworshipnight.com. It's spelled out NINETIESWORSHIPNIGHT.com. You see, spell out just like my hat.
Yeah.
90s worship night.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. Chad, thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming on the show, and it's been great having the chat. And we definitely look forward to more of the music coming out, and having that on the show. We look forward to that, and I can't wait to check out the docuseries though.
yes, well, thank you so much, Mark. You are a wonderful partner of ours. We are so grateful. And yeah, definitely we'll have to maybe get back together once we release some of the docuseries and talk about that, because I think it will be educational and entertaining both. So I'm excited about that.
Yeah, definitely looking forward to that. But thank you so much for joining us today. The Extreme BPM guys, Tuesdays and Fridays.